Hi, here in this video, let's talk about the essay. If Black English isn't a language, then tell me what is, by James Baldwin. He goes into depth of what a language is and what it represents. Baldwin makes a bold statement that he wasn't trying to specifically argue about the language, but the role languages play. Let's look at the summary of the essay.
If Black English isn't a language, then tell me, what is? By James Baldwin. First published in the New York Times on July 29, 1979. Summary of the essay. If Black English isn't a language, then tell me, what is? By James Baldwin, goes into depth of what a language is and what it represents. Baldwin makes a bold statement that he wasn't trying to specifically argue about the language but the role languages play. He states people evolve a language in order to describe and thus control their circumstances, or in order not to be submerged by a reality that they cannot articulate. And, if they cannot articulate it, they are submerged. Languages come to life to be able to communicate and describe our thoughts and emotions to one another. Being put into situations where we don't understand what is being said. We feel lost, almost like being underwater. He says that language is also power and that language can be dangerous. He comes to say that it can reveal one's private identity, hidden hopes, and can either disconnect or connect one to the community. Language gives us power we can mistreat. It can allow us to reveal things that are better undiscovered. In his writing What Caught My Eye is when he says, "Now, I do not know what white Americans would sound like if there had never been any black people in the United States. But they would not sound the way they sound. Jazz, for example, is a very specific sexual term, as in jazz me, baby, but white people purified it into the jazz age." I agreed when he says this. Black people have influenced and continue to influence many people of different races, such as how we speak, dress, etc. In this quote he is also saying that they made a foundation in which white people tried to make their own. He also states, "The brutal truth is that the bulk of white people in America never had any interest in educating black people. Except as this could serve white purposes. He feels that the only reason the white people taught the black people their language was so they can be slaves. It would be easier to command and push someone around if they understand your orders." In saying this he makes a point that a child can't be taught by someone who doesn't have the right intentions with him. A language comes into existence by means of brutal necessity, and the rules of the language are dictated by what the language must convey. This part caught my attention. It made me think about where languages even came from. He mentions in his writing how the whites educated blacks for the wrong intentions. It was brutal. They were only taught how to communicate with whites, to be taken advantage of. We use languages as a form of communication. We give words meanings, we give words placements, such as bad or good. We put words into categories. We convey with words what we want, whether it is good or bad. We hurt people with our words. And we make languages to separate one another, and make it known we are all not the same. Let's listen to the complete essay. Saint Paul de Vence, France. The argument concerning the use, or the status, or the reality of Black English is rooted in American history and has absolutely nothing to do with the question the argument supposes itself to be posing. The argument has nothing to do with language itself but with the role of language. Language, incontestably, reveals the speaker. Language, also, far more dubiously, is meant to define the other and, in this case, the other is refusing to be defined by a language that has never been able to recognize him. People evolve a language in order to describe and thus control their circumstances, or in order not to be submerged by a reality that they cannot articulate. And, if they cannot articulate it, they are submerged. A Frenchman living in Paris speaks a subtly and crucially different language from that of the man living in Marseille. Neither sounds very much like a man living in Quebec, and they would all have great difficulty in apprehending what the man from Guadeloupe, or Martinique, is saying, to say nothing of the man from Senegal. although the common language of all these areas is French. But each has paid, and is paying, a different price for this common language, in which, as it turns out, they are not saying, and cannot be saying, the same things. They each have very different realities to articulate, or control. What joins all languages, and all men, is the necessity to confront life, in order, not inconceivably, to outwit death. The price for this is the acceptance, and achievement, of one's temporal identity. So that, for example, though it is not taught in the schools, and this has the potential of becoming a political issue, the south of France still clings to its ancient and musical Provençal, which resists being described as a dialect. And much of the tension in the Basque countries, and in Wales, is due to the Basque and Welsh determination not to allow their languages to be destroyed. This determination also feeds the flames in Ireland, for among the many indignities the Irish have been forced to undergo at English hands is the English contempt for their language. It goes without saying, then, that language is also a political instrument, means, and proof of power. It is the most vivid and crucial key to identity. It reveals the private identity, and connects one with, or divorces one from, the larger, public, or communal identity. There have been, and are, times, and places, when to speak a certain language could be dangerous, even fatal. Or, one may speak the same language, but in such a way that one's antecedents are revealed, or, one hopes, hidden. This is true in France, and is absolutely true in England. The range, and reign, of accents on that damp little island make England coherent for the English and totally incomprehensible for everyone else. To open your mouth in England is, if I may use black English, to put your business in the street. You have confessed your parents, your youth, your school, your salary, your self-esteem, and, alas, your future. Now, I do not know what white Americans would sound like if there had never been any black people in the United States, but they would not sound the way they sound. Jazz, for example, is a very specific sexual term, as in jazz me, baby, but white people purified it into the jazz age. Sock it to me, which means, roughly, the same thing, has been adopted by Nathaniel Hawthorne's descendants with no qualms or hesitations at all, along with let it all hang out and write on. Beat to his socks, which was once the black's most total and despairing image of poverty, was transformed into a thing called the Beat Generation. Which phenomenon was, largely, composed of uptight, middle-class white people, imitating poverty, trying to get down, to get with it, doing their thing, doing their despairing best to be funky, which we, the blacks, never dreamed of doing. We were funky, baby, like funk was going out of style. Now, no one can eat his cake, and have it, too, and it is late in the day to attempt to penalize black people for having created a language that permits the nation its only glimpse of reality, a language without which the nation would be even more whipped than it is. I say that the present skirmish is rooted in American history, and it is. Black English is the creation of the black diaspora. Blacks came to the United States chained to each other, but from different tribes. Neither could speak the other's language. If two black people, at that bitter hour of the world's history, had been able to speak to each other, the institution of chattel slavery could never have lasted as long as it did. Subsequently, the slave was given, under the eye, and the gun, of his master, Congo Square, and the Bible, or in other words, and under these conditions, the slave began the formation of the black church, and it is within this unprecedented tabernacle that black English began to be formed. This was not, merely, as in the European example, the adoption of a foreign tongue, but an alchemy that transformed ancient elements into a new language. A language comes into existence by means of brutal necessity, and the rules of the language are dictated by what the language must convey. There was a moment, in time, and in this place, when my brother, or my mother, or my father, or my sister, had to convey to me, for example, the danger in which I was standing from the white man standing just behind me, and to convey this with a speed, and in a language, that the white man could not possibly understand, and that, indeed, he cannot understand, until today. He cannot afford to understand it. This understanding would reveal to him too much about himself, and smash that mirror before which he has been frozen for so long. Now, if this passion, this skill, this, to quote Toni Morrison, sheer intelligence, this incredible music, the mighty achievement of having brought a people utterly unknown to, or despised by history, to have brought this people to their present, troubled, troubling, and unassailable and unanswerable place, if this absolutely unprecedented journey does not indicate that Black English is a language, I am curious to know what definition of language is to be trusted. A people at the center of the Western world, and in the midst of so hostile a population, has not endured and transcended by means of what is patronizingly called a dialect. We, the blacks, are in trouble, certainly, but we are not doomed, and we are not inarticulate because we are not compelled to defend a morality that we know to be a lie. The brutal truth is that the bulk of white people in America never had any interest in educating black people, except as this could serve white purposes. It is not the black child's language that is in question, it is not his language that is despised. It is his experience. A child cannot be taught by anyone who despises him, and a child cannot afford to be fooled. A child cannot be taught by anyone whose demand, essentially, is that the child repudiate his experience and all that gives him sustenance, and enter a limbo in which he will no longer be black, and in which he knows that he can never become white. Black people have lost too many black children that way. And, after all, finally, in a country with standards so untrustworthy, a country that makes heroes of so many criminal mediocrities, a country unable to face why so many of the non-white are in prison, or on the needle, or standing, futureless, in the streets. It may very well be that both the child, and his elder, have concluded that they have nothing whatever to learn from the people of a country that has managed to learn so little. End of the essay. Thank you. Thank you.